celle d'avant? Attends.
Here we go. There we are. Well, let's face it, it's an enormous privilege to be here. And let's face it, it's an enormous privilege to be here with you, all forensic friends. And it has been such a long time since we had the opportunity to share together. It's an enormous privilege to be invited, both myself and Didier. We will be partner in crime for this afternoon. We had been partner in crime for quite a long time, including the meeting in Lausanne in 1997. So we changed clothes. That's the only thing that we have changed in 25 years. But the friendship and brotherhood which bind us is very present. This presentation is a presentation with two speakers because we wanted to highlight that forensic science is not done alone. It's done through collaboration between people. It is done through fertile exchange over years. And we will also use this presentation to act as a teaser and not a spoiler for some of the talks that will be given in the pink track on your app. So we really hope that you will bear with us. Now, from the audience, it was clear that there is mixed feelings about the use of biometrics in forensic science. We will concentrate essentially on face recognition as a conduit to this conversation. However, everything we're going to say will probably apply to all forensic techniques used in our discipline. The outline is as follows. We will share the floor between myself and Didier. Didier will demystify some of the applications that underpin the use of facial recognition in forensic science. And then I will move into how we evaluate these findings. You will not be surprised, but certainly to spend more time about how technology should work with human, or how human should work with technology. And this partnership is not easy. Finally, Didier will go into the validation of these techniques, which are at the core of the necessity and the requirement for quality, and will lead us to a conclusion. So without further ado, I will just ask Didier to tell us what we can do with these things.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Good afternoon. I join you, Christophe, to say thank you very much for this nice invitation. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. And we will start with the forensic face data. And as everything in forensic science, I should start this one. Everything in forensic science starts with a trace, and we call it a trace specimen. And you see this little picture of Christophe. It's taken in uncontrolled condition, and that's what is a trace. And the biometric people call it captured in the wild. And for us, the wild is the crime scene. And then, of course, we have a reference specimen, and you see here a picture of Christophe taken in controlled condition. This is the same, a long time ago, I should have said.
Hadn't changed.
That's kind of picture you do when you go for your passport, or if you have ever been arrested, could have been as well, but I hope for you not. And the biometric people call it more a reference sample. And finally, something maybe less known, the probe. It's also taken in controlled condition, and if you went through a kiosk, a biometric kiosk at the airport, you pose in front of the camera, and the capture is a probe. And with these three types of data, we will start to think this afternoon. And the biometric people call it more a test sample. So let's define what is forensic face recognition. Forensic face recognition is the application of human-based and computer-based face recognition methods and technologies to examine face, trace, probe, and reference specimen, and to answer questions about the origin of biometric trace or probe, the activity that leads to a biometric trace, and if this activity is constitutive of an offense. We will take some few minutes to discuss about the technology, and then we will go to the application. Basically, the face recognition core technology is allowing to compare two objects. In this case, a trace and a reference, but it could be a probe and a reference as well. And it produces a biometric score. And this biometric score provides information about the similarity and typicality of the specimens that are compared. It provides information that it is the same person at two different moments in time. You have seen a picture of Christophe a long time ago and a picture of Christophe more recently. It does not link directly with biographic data, such as the name or the age. For this, you need an extra database. And hence, it doesn't identify a person by itself. So that's for the technology. And now, if you want to know more about the application of forensic face recognition in forensic environment, I recommend you to go to the presentation of Erika Hedberg and the presentation of Meuwly Jacquet later during the week. Now we will focus on the application, and first we will look at it from a legal perspective that distinguishes between prevention and investigation. Prevention, this is what happened outside a criminal law procedure, and typically the application is surveillance. And the investigation are the applications that happen inside the criminal law procedure, and typically investigation, intelligence, identity verification, identification, and evaluation for court. From a forensic perspective, we still do another distinction between the investigative phase and the evaluative phase. And the European Union make a difference between what is outside of criminal law procedures, that is considered as high risk application, and what is inside the criminal law procedure, that is considered as low risk. And if you want to know more about the legal perspective, I advise you to go to the presentation of Ernestina Sacchetto later in this week. Now we will go to the application one after each other. First, I will present them together and then one after each other. So you recognize here the trace that is captured in uncontrolled condition and that can be stored in a trace database. And here you recognize the reference that is captured in controlled condition and that can be stored in a reference database. And finally, you recognize the probe that can be captured in controlled condition. And with this, we can describe all the application. The first one is the comparison of the face probe with the face reference at the airport. It's called face identity verification. That's the simplest one. The second one is the comparison of the face probe with the reference database. That's the face identification, closed set or open set. And finally, the face intelligence is the comparison of trace material between each other. On the top part, you have face investigation and surveillance. This is the comparison or searching a face trace inside a reference database. And finally, the comparison of a trace and a reference material, this is what we call the forensic face evaluation. It's a lot of information on one slide. Now we will go through all of them. So first, the identity verification. You see here the probe and the reference. So the technology brings a biometric score, and then you apply a threshold, and if it's the same person, you expect that the technology will accept this identity, and when it is a different person, you expect that the identity is rejected. A good example is access control. I don't want to sell you a new phone here, but just to mention that you are using it probably every day, a lot of time, to unlock your telephone. Another application is border control identity verification. I mentioned before when you go through a biometric kiosk at the airport. And this is an example of Australia capturing technology for the border control. Now we go to face closed set identification. This is comparing a probe inside the reference database. Again, you use a technology. Here you produce a lot of scores, N, and you select the candidate in the rank 1, and you consider this person as identified. But in the forensic context, the assumption of a closed set is rarely met. That's why identification is more played in an open set in the forensic field. So the first part is the same as in the closed set, but the first candidate is compared with a threshold and can still be rejected or accepted. A good example of this is the Boston Marathon bombing, in which you see that it's clearly an open set. You don't know who is in this crowd. And the two main suspects in the case were not in the reference database. Later, there has been a case study done, and they had shown that in 2013, the technology was not good enough in order to push these two candidates high enough to be of use for the police. It has changed a lot until now. The technology made big step, particularly with machine learning, but in 2013 it was not good enough. Forensic face intelligence, you see a database of traces, and they are compared within each other to produce, again, a large amount of scores. And these scores are submitted to a threshold, and the highest one are considered as links, and the other one are considered as noise. And we have not found an example using automatic face recognition, but some example done manually. And this is a Swiss case, so we could put some little Swiss flag here. It was a series of cases in which the same rented car was seen. And in some of these cases, pictures of the perpetrator were done, and through intelligence, they were linked. And later in the case, people were arrested, and in the evaluative phase, one of them was the defendant in the case. Finally, face investigation and face surveillance. Why are they together on the same slide? They are together because they are technically very similar. It's the comparison of trace material with a database. But everybody has heard about Clearview AI. This is a company offering face recognition service in the wild to public entities and private entities. So in the two situations, normally the images are captured without people being aware. I'm sure if you travel to an airport, you have been filmed, and most of the time you were not aware you were filmed. But in face investigation, these images are used in a criminal law procedure, so considered as low risk. In face surveillance, these images are used outside of criminal law procedures. This is considered as high risk. Regarding the databases, the database for face investigation, it's composed of references captured in a criminal law procedure. For surveillance, they are publicly available images captured from the internet. The question, is it legal or illegal to use image publicly available? The answer is it depends where you are. The GDPR restricts the use of that. It's illegal in Europe. In some state of the US, it is legal. In the same way, using publicly available images in the face investigation is certainly illegal in Europe, but it's very difficult to control that in practice. I think we went through all the application. I will just finish showing the results of an EU project that has been made about face investigation. That's the status of implementation of face recognition in Europe in 2020. So you see the different countries. Some countries, including Europol and Interpol, have implemented face recognition for investigation already. Some have their implementation underway, and some have no plan for near future implementation. And if you want to know more about the results of this project that was named Telefi, I recommend you to go to the presentation of Andra Sigmertz during the week. Thank you. Christophe, I let you introduce face evaluation. That is our last application.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it was mentioned that one of the key requirements for new forensic technology is its ability also not only to help police investigation and provide swift and timely information to investigators, as most of these applications can deliver. At the same time, it's also to provide robust evidence in court. So I will concentrate on how we can deliver this if there is some correspondence, as you may judge by yourself, between these two images. And the human may come into play like you do, and probably in the room we have some face recognition experts who may assist us in that task. And then biometric technology can also provide, through the provision of a score, related to the closeness between these two images, whether or not it is the same person. So, as a starting point, I will mention that the weight to be attached to this potential correspondence has to be assessed through a likelihood ratio. So we are expecting somehow that these experts, and I'm going to use these in plural because it can be a human, it can be a machine, work together in order to deliver some realistic weight of evidence. And I show you the type of methods which are used to convert the score obtained from a biometric system into a proper assessment of weight of evidence. It is nicknamed SLR, not for the Mercedes, but for the score-based likelihood ratio. The SLR is obtained by conducting comparison between the trace and a series of faces held on database. It can be mugshots, for example. And that provide a series of scores which will represent what we name the within-source variability. On the other hand, due to variation between traces, even from the same source, and you have seen the effect of time on some of the previous images, the within-source variability has to be accounted for, and these scores obtained from the cross-comparison between images we know are coming from the source of interest describe what we name the within-source variability. The ratio obtained in a case between the density under the proposition that it's a different source compared to the one coming from the same source is what we name the likelihood ratio. And most of biometric systems can be adapted to obtain as an output a calibrated score-based likelihood ratio. Now, unfortunately, these systems may got it wrong. So I show you two images, and please form a view as to whether or not they refer to the same person. I know that some in the room know these individuals or these individuals already. In fact, it is the same person, but the likelihood ratio will guide us otherwise. So yes, score-based system may guide in the wrong direction. Not to a large degree, it is a small likelihood ratio, but still. And also, so that's what we name the rate of misleading evidence in support of the defense, when truly it is the same source. I'm telling you, this is my colleague Franco. And here, you have seen these individuals, at least one. I can confirm I'm the trace. And the likelihood ratio system is providing quite strong evidence in favor of the view that I'm the person, the same person as the reference. It's not me, obviously, as some of you in the room may testify to. So these systems have a potential to mislead also when the prosecution is true. Now, one of the points with biometric systems which are essentially based on data and assessed is that you can measure these error rates. You can measure them, whereas potentially for the human it's a bit harder to measure and to make a comparison. One of the key challenges in the future is how to combine these experts in generic sense. In typical forensic laboratories, you will have facial recognition experts who will do a manual, holistic comparison in a very structured way. And that person will be the human expert, which I have named expert 1. Then his work will be checked by a checker or verifier, who I have named expert 2, who will reconduct the examination in an independent manner. And at that stage already, and every laboratory have lived through this, you may have the need for some conciliation or reconciliation of differing opinions. The arrival of a machine-based likelihood ratio is no different. They may go in the same direction, they may go in opposite direction. You may need to have proper systems to reconcile the various opinions and get to a consolidated and a likelihood ratio that will be reported. The arrival of a machine is not taking over the work of human. We need to find ways to collaborate together because both have strong strengths and weaknesses. And I list a few of them on the human side, and we don't like to admit that we have some weaknesses, but one of them, which I'd like to highlight, is the fact that we may be biased. And especially with face recognition, the risk of cognitive and bias is high. On the other hand, we use other features to distinguish entities that machines will not directly or explicitly use, like the shape of the ears. Human-based their judgment on personal probabilities, and the difference is that the machine, by the machinery behind it, allow to compute likelihood ratio and not assign them based on personal probabilities. It has the advantage of the machine learning techniques at the cost of the need for data, which data might be biased as well and cause some bias. So there is more than just technology, and it's not one or the other. And as one of the laboratory manager that Henry Swafford interviewed during his PhD, and this is a hint to the paper we published together, there is fear that technology may take over, or the numbers out of a machine will dominate the judgment at the end. Well, I think in a nutshell, it's a little bit like when you drive your car. More and more, you have assisting driving to various degrees. So it started like little beeps when you were coming to a wall, and then now you can almost stop touching the steering wheel. And there is different levels of machine involvement in an expertise, the expertise of driving. So where do you stop, and what do you accept in this interaction between man and machine? So Henry Swafford published a 5-point scale from 0 to 5, where you start with point 0, where no assistance is provided by algorithm, to section 5, where you have algorithmic only, but the car is driving alone. And this, just to clarify what is the level of involvement that we want from machine to the forensic world, helps to tease out what is required and what is necessary. And let me take you through three scenarios. The first is limited assistance. It's probably where most biometric techniques comes into play today in forensic science. In fact, it is quite often used after the expert opinion. The human will remain in charge of the evaluation, and it is viewed as a supplemental which is used at the discretion of the expert. At the end of the day, the experts remain in the driving seat. We may move with face recognition and other biometric system to stage 2, where the algorithm is used as a quality control. It's used as a quality control after the expert opinion, so after our both experts. It will assist to the evaluation. It is a supplemental quality control system, and you expect to have some standard operating procedure mitigating the potential conflicts between them. The next stage is having an algorithm-informed opinion where the run of the biometric system can be done before and then combined with a human. It will be a human algorithm integrated evaluation, so the number comes in the judgment of the expert. And at the end of the day, we still need some robust quality assurance system, and the output will be a mix, an algorithmic output which is human supported to the discretion and the regulation that had been put in place for the use of a human. Positioning these techniques from stage 1 to stage 5 allow to demystify their positioning and how they're going to be used. And I think it's very important that we clarify this. Now, of course, new techniques need validation, and Didier will take you through the various validation scheme.
Thank you, Christophe. Yes, we will talk now about validation and explanation and why do we need method validation and explanation. I think the first thing is we think the computer is a black box, so we don't trust it by itself. But let's face it, we also think that the human brain is a black box. And for both of them, we need to reassure ourselves that the technology is fit for purpose in the application. So let's start with the explanation. There is a lot of discussion about artificial intelligence explanation, for example. In the forensic context, we think it's desirable. It's probably necessary for the advance of research and the development of the technology, but in the forensic context, we think it's desirable. It's very nice to know how the human brain works and how does it do the task of face recognition. In the same way, it's very good to review the code that is used for face recognition, but we don't think this is the most important. We think the most important is the validation. And the validation, what does it mean? It means we think it's necessary and it is putting the system in real condition, real case condition, being a human being or a computer. A human being, you will ask them to compare trace material with reference with probe. And for a computer, you will load it with a large amount of data and you will do a lot of number crunching and trying to see what are the results. And for the validation of automatic method, we have proposed a validation methodology in 4 steps. The step one is the technology validation. Is the technology fit for purpose? That's to exclude every technology that is not fit for purpose, basically. The second step is the application validation. How does the method perform when it's put in the application, be it evaluation, investigation, and intelligence? And forensic science evolving from a craftsmanship to a more integrated system, we have different people working in different parts. And here we think the responsibility for these 2 steps are the forensic scientist, the forensic statistician, and the forensic computer scientist who are in charge of developing the method. And if you want to know more about validation methodology, go to listen Rolf Ipma later in this week. I know that today he missed his plane in Schiphol, but I hope that for Thursday he will be here. Then the third step is the operational validation. How does the examiner apply the method in casework? It doesn't not only land on his desk. He needs to understand the method to be able to produce results with it, but he or she also needs to be able to describe the method in the report and to go to testify in court and be able to explain how the method works. And that's not very easy. The 4th step is the case-by-case validation, and that's the last step, is how does the method perform in a specific case condition. Every case is unique. You listen that from examiners, and this is really true. And these steps is necessary when you are operating at the edge of the validated condition. And we think the responsibility here is for the forensic examiner itself, the forensic counter expert, and the forensic consultant. Quite a lot of people are studying this aspect of validation. We are happy about this, and in our track, I recommend you to go to see the presentation of Joanna Tuvskog, the workshop of Geoffrey Morrison, and the presentation of David van der Vloed, and you will know more about this aspect. So I let Christophe to conclude.
Well, we can conclude together.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the starting point, the starting question to you was, do you trust this technology used by law enforcement agencies? And do we fear that innocent people, innocent parties, like in this case, are all of a sudden hold up responsible for something that they did not commit, just because face recognition technology has been used? What we wanted to do through this talk is to try to tease out or structure a little bit the applications and make us think about where we are and what are the risks and what is low risk and what is high risk. And it has been well identified in the discussions at the EU. So ban or not ban the technology, I think we advise that we should keep it. It's research it that needs to be done and not losing it. Otherwise, other people will research it and will not be ready and not be cognizant enough to handle the technology when it becomes available. But we need some restriction to restrict its usage, but this restriction needs to be based not on what we believe are the dangers, but it needs to be based on rational arguments and data. And it's only with this that we'll be equipped to make an informed judgment as to what should be done, what can be done, and what ought to be done for the sake of the good administration of justice. So let us conclude with a few key elements we'd like you to take home. The first is the what. When it comes to the use of biometric techniques, there is a need to define very clearly what are the applications. They need to be spelled out, not defined as we go along, not defined as the technology is made available to us, but before the technology is made available to us. We need to measure competence and machine performance. And competence is more towards the human expert, because the human expert will stay in charge of a lot of tasks, especially when it comes to face recognition, but for other biometric disciplines as well, but needs to be tested on ground truth data. And likewise, these biometric system needs to be tested on ground truth data as well. Who? Well, we need to train examiners. We need to train forensic examiners, but we need to train also stakeholders in general, because the communication, and that will be treated this week extensively, between forensic science, legal practitioners, police officers, society at large, is what determines what we can do and how we will do it in the future. So missing that communication link leads to misconceptions, which may lead to a stop of using very helpful technology in forensic science just because of fear or misconceptions. How? Well, there is an absolute requirement to respect privacy and data protection. This is not an option to do differently. This is what builds trust between citizens and authorities about how using biometric technology. So it has to come first. The second is that all needs to be within the ethos of a quality assurance system. The procedures needs to be defined and then used, and not use the technology and think about the procedure once you got a problem. And we need to avoid data and application creep. A technology which is proposed to do an activity A, all of a sudden is used by the authorities to do an activity B. Don't use technology outside the remit that they have been validated for, and in the context they have been prepared. Function creeping is a big risk because it lowers the trust between the authorities and their citizens. And finally, communicate, and communicate publicly on the performance. So these error rates, which I mentioned, they need to be made public. They don't need to be hidden in the forensic labs. We need to be open to every stakeholders about the limits of technology, based either on human endeavor on one hand or on machine. We thank you very much, and we are available for any question.